Okay, good morning, everybody. I am Erin Turbot, the Public Information Officer with the Wyoming Department of Workforce Services, and I'm thrilled to welcome you to today's virtual training series, Youth Employment Laws, State and Federal Rules for Workers Under 18. This series was created based on your feedback, and we're excited to bring you topics that matter most. Be sure to check out our website at dws.wyo.gov/VTS. We are dropping that link right in the chat, and that will show you upcoming sessions, registration, and recordings of past events. Today's session is being recorded, and all materials will be available on our site within a few days. If you have questions during the presentation, just pop them into chat and we will answer them at the end of the hour. Now let's dive in. Please welcome today's speaker, Jason Delo, our Labor Standards Program Manager. Jason, take it away.
Thank you, Erin. So Erin noted we are going to be discussing child labor laws in the state. Just to kind of give everybody kind of a background on what Labor Standards does in general. We enforce child labor law. We also administer the Wyoming's Fair Employment Practices Program. We administer Wyoming's wage and hour laws. We set and enforce the prevailing wage, and we are in charge of the resident contractor certification. My presentation is going to work this morning is we're going to start with the laws that are set by Wyoming statute, and then we'll go into the differences and kind of compare and contrast the difference between the state and the federal law. In order to work in the state of Wyoming, you have to be at least 14 years old. There are some exceptions for farm work, domestic work, lawn yard services. Children under the age of 14 can work for their parents or grandparents in a non-hazardous occupation, provided they do so outside of school hours. Wyoming does not require work permits. We did at one point, but we no longer do so. And it's now up to the employer to maintain a copy or maintain proof of what the individual's age is. So they want to be, if you're hiring folks under the age of 18, you definitely want to be having a hold of their birth certificate or an identification card or something like that. There are some work hour restrictions for kids under the age of 16. They can't work more than 8 hours in a 12-hour day. They can't work before 5 or after 10. But on nights that are not followed by a school night, they can work as late as midnight. And again, there are some exceptions for farm and domestic services. Kids between 14 and 16 not enrolled in school can work 8 hours between 5 a.m. and midnight in any one day. No child under the age of 16 who is enrolled in a private or public school in the state can be permitted to work during the time that the classes of said school are in session. Basically, what this means is we look at the dates and times the local school district is in session, and those are the determining factors of when school is going to be considered to be in session for any particular individual. Wyoming's hazardous occupations are pretty few. They can't be involved in working on any heavy construction equipment. They can't be required to have contact with explosives or dangerous chemicals. What this does mean is that kids cannot work under the age of 16, cannot work in fireworks shops or sales. They got to stay away from the stands. The Wyoming Department of Workforce Services can declare any particular occupation to be hazardous. As part of the statute, if we feel that that's something somebody under 16 should not be doing, we can kind of declare a particular job hazardous. To date, the only thing we've ever really declared hazardous, however, is electricians. It goes back to a case involving a gentleman who was asked to have his friend's 14-year-old son work for him. He was an electrician, primarily did work wiring up outbuildings, barns, shops, and rural property. So he was dealing with some fairly substantial voltage when he did that. and was determined that was probably too dangerous for somebody 14 years of age to be doing. Wyoming law also prohibits folks under the age of 16 from doing any immoral work, and it's not very well defined, I'll be honest. They can't work as an actor or performer in any concert hall or where alcoholic beverages are sold, or can they work in any business that would be injurious to their morals or safety. There is an exception to the working in alcoholic establishments. Folks that are under the age of 16 can work as busboys, servers, delivery persons, dishwashers in those businesses. If you violate one of Wyoming's child labor laws, you can face a fine up to $750 and or 100 days in jail. So it is a criminal penalty that gets enforced by the local prosecuting attorney. Wyoming has a training wage, which allows anyone under the age of 20 to be paid as little as $4.25 an hour for the first 90 consecutive days that they work for a particular employer. The feds also have this and allow this. The only caveat is you cannot displace another worker in order to take advantage of this rate and hire somebody at the lower rate. So that does it for the restrictions put in place by Wyoming state statute. We're going to move into federal law and the Fair Labor Standards Act. Feds still require folks to be at least 14 years of age. They don't require work permits. And again, the employer is required to maintain proof of age for the individual employee. The exceptions to the 14-year-old are, newspaper delivery, babysitting, and then businesses owned by the child's parents. So the work hours are much more restrictive for the feds. Kids under the age of 16 can't work more than 3 hours on a school day and not during school hours. They can work no more than 18 hours during the school week. They can work 8 hours during a non-school day and up to 40 hours during a non-school week. They cannot work before 7 a.m. or after 7 p.m., except between June 1st and Labor Day, the hours go up to 9 p.m. Feds also have a lot more prohibited hazardous occupations. Kids, 14 and 15-year-olds can't operate lawnmowers, weed whackers, all-terrain vehicles, edgers, trimmers, those kinds of things. And they can't be involved in catching or cooping chickens or poultry. The feds also prohibit some things for folks up to 17 years of age. And they can't be involved in manufacturing or storing explosives. They can't be working outside as drivers or working as helpers on outside vehicles. There is an exception, a limited exception for those that are 17 years old. They can do occasional driving for their job that is incidental to their job. I.e., it is not the principal activity and it's not done in any kind of regularity. Other than that, they simply don't want folks under the age of 18 driving vehicles for work. Those folks also can't work in logging and sawmilling operations. It's generally advised to keep them away from all kinds of power-driven equipment to include food grinders, food mixers, hoisting apparatuses, food choppers, any kind of metal forming, punching, cutting machines, bakery machines, paper product machines, circular saws, bandsaws, and guillotine shears. They also can't be involved in occupations involving slaughtering or meat packing, rendering. They can't be involved in any kind of mining operation. This would include even things like gravel mining, really simple operations. They can't be involved in making bricks, tile, or affiliated products. They can't be involved in wrecking, demolition, or shipbreaking. They can't be involved in roofing occupations, and this is kind of a big one for the feds. You generally want to keep kids off of ladders if they're under age 18, just to keep in compliance with that particular provision. They can't be involved in peddling outside their employer's place of business, so like door-to-door sales or selling things on street corners are not allowed. So which law do you follow? You would follow the federal law if you fall under the Fair Labor Standards Act, and would have to be faced with choice of either following state or federal law. Generally, when there's a difference between state and federal law, you follow a law that is the most restrictive or provides the greatest benefit or protection to the employee. And in most cases, that's going to be the Fed's law. I would encourage you, if you have questions involving possible issues with the federal law, that you get a hold of the U.S. Department of Labor, because their law is very, very nuanced. And there's a number of kind of hidden exemptions in there that they're not always apparent at first blush. So give them a call at their Salt Lake City, Utah address. That is the in charge of the region that's in charge of Wyoming. So how do you know if you're following the Fair Labor Standards Act? And generally, if you have gross receipts in excess of $500,000 a year, or you're engaged in any kind of business transacting business across state lines, you're going to be covered by the Fair Labor Standards Act. Most businesses in Wyoming are actually covered by the FLSA, simply because of the transaction clause there. Things get a little bit more expensive when you're dealing with federal law. The charge for violations goes up to $11,000 per violation, and can be as much as $100,000 if a child is hurt while committing it or while working in violation of federal law. Now, a couple of questions we frequently get concerning child labor that labor standards actually doesn't enforce are: when can folks sell or serve alcoholic beverages, and when can they sell or deliver tobacco products? In order to sell tobacco products, they have to be 21, and they have to be at least 18 before they can serve alcoholic beverages in like a restaurant or food service arena. Student learner agreements. Now, this is a program that lets kids work in extra hazardous occupations with Wyoming workers' compensation coverage. It involves the school, the student, the division, and the employer. It allows the students to be covered under the Wyoming Workers' Compensation Act while gaining real-world experience and school credit or compensation for learning a craft or trade. In order to be eligible, students have to be between 16 and 18 years old. Students must meet and maintain academic and attendance requirements for the school. The employers have to be in good standing with both workers' compensation and unemployment insurance, as well as the Secretary of State's office, and maintain those good standing throughout the time that the individual is working in the program. The job duties have to fall within the 7 hazardous occupation exceptions allowed. And a reference for this would be the Child Labor Bulletin 101 under hazardous occupations under the Fair Labor Standards Act. There's an application process that students have to go through, as well as the employers. The employers are responsible for submitting the completed application for the student workers. Employers have to notify the division if there are any changes to the agreement, if those occur. And employers have to report the student on future workers' compensation wage lists as they complete their job duties. You can find the application at the website here if you're interested in kind of getting involved in that program. The hazardous occupations that the student learner would be allowed to work in go back to power-driven woodworking machines, power-driven metal forming machines, operating power-driven meat processing equipment, power-driven balers, compactors, and other paper processing machines, as well as those circular saws, bandsaws, guillotines, chainsaws, and abrasive cutting discs. They're also allowed to do some roofing occupations and be involved in excavation operations. If you have questions about getting involved in the student learner program, I would encourage you to reach out to the email address on the screen, businessrisk@wyo.gov. They can give you all the details and help you navigate the process of getting signed up for that. That's my presentation. And does anybody have any questions?
Hey, Jason, we do have some questions. The first that we've got is, does private school include homeschool children? Or in other words, can homeschooled children work during the middle of the day?
The answer to that is no. They look at when the school is in session for the local school, public school district, and whenever that is in session, kids aren't allowed to work. They can work before school, they can work after school, provided the business is owned by their parents, but they can't work during those school hours.
Okay. Next one, can a 17-year-old high school dropout be working for a lawn mowing company at 10 a.m. on a Tuesday?
Simple as that is under Wyoming law, yes. And I believe under federal law as well, they can do that. All of Wyoming's child labor protections come off once the child turns 16 years old. So those kind of go away.
Okay. Next one, can an enrolled high school student work during the day as a lifeguard or auditorium tech?
Provides that during school hours, yeah.
Provided it's not during school hours, okay. All right. We've got a few others. And if anyone else has questions, please feel free to throw them in the chat or in the Q&A. Can I hire a minor as an independent contractor instead of an employee?
Theoretically, yes. They can have their own businesses. You would make very, very sure that that individual is actually acting as a true independent contractor. As if they are not, and you can't simply just say they're an independent contractor and then hire them. If they're not a truly independent contractor, you can be in violation of the child labor laws. And like I said, the penalties for violating the federal laws are pretty stiff.
Okay. Can individuals under the age of 18 operate ATV equipment like a Polaris Ranger for tasks such as emptying garbage cans at events such as a fair or a carnival?
Okay. So provided they're over 50, they're 16 or older, they can do that. What they can't do is operate those vehicles on public thoroughfares. So they can drive around like on a golf course, they can drive along like an amusement park, picking up trash with their golf cart, but they can't get on a public road. At that point, if they do that, at that point, they're in violation of federal law.
Okay. Can minors clean equipment they are not allowed to operate?
The short answer is probably yes. Again, you want to be very, very careful that they can't turn that equipment on or work it in any way, shape, or form, because then they'd be considered to be operating it and it would be a violation of the law.
Okay. Can a minor deliver products to customers using their own car?
No, in general, they cannot. There is that restriction that allows, the exception allows 17-year-olds to do some minor and incidental driving for their job. And they could occasionally maybe do something like that. But in general, they do not want folks under the age of 18 acting as delivery drivers.
Okay. What are the requirements for a minor to work in a facility with a walk-in freezer?
Okay, so if they are under the age of 16, they can go in and retrieve things from a walk-in freezer. They can't spend much time in there, but they can go and retrieve things, bring them out.
Okay. What happens if what happens if a minor voluntarily stays late?
Okay, so the minor can't do that. The individual that's in charge of that person or directing that person's work would be held responsible for keeping the child longer. And again, it can result in a violation of both state and federal child labor.
Okay. Is a dishwasher considered dangerous? What is the age needed for a child to be a dishwasher?
So if they're doing it by hand, they can be 14 years old. If they're using some of the more complex dishwashing machines, you might want to check with the USDOL and see if they have a objection to that. In particular, that might actually involve the particular machine. The idea is if it can grab a hold of them and pull them in, they probably wouldn't want them doing it until they're 18.
Okay. What are the restrictions for minors in road construction?
Well, in general, they shouldn't be doing it. Again, it's one of those hazardous occupations that the feds have pretty limited on. They can probably do some of the manual labor, shoveling things, but you don't want them working with any kind of power equipment. And you certainly don't want them working on any kind of heavy construction equipment, driving any loaders, backhoes, any kind of thing like that.
Okay. Can a 17-year-old drive their own vehicle to the bank for work purposes on a daily basis?
Not on a daily basis. Again, it would have to be incidental to their job and not regularly done.
Okay. Are there any requirements for a homeschooled student to work over the summer?
Not any more than what any other kid would be required to do.
Okay.
As long as they're 14, they can work.
Okay. For kids under 18, if they are working in an environment that does not have defined work hours, for instance, they work until the work is completed. Sometimes it's 5 hours, sometimes it's 8 hours, sometimes it's 12. Is the business allowed to prevent them from breaks or lunch because the hours are not defined?
Okay.
This person is having this issue with a local business.
Okay. So the business could be responsible for violating the child labor laws if they're holding them over what they would otherwise be allowed to do under the law. There actually isn't any law in state or federal statutes that require an employer to provide a break for any reason for any employee. So yeah, they can tell them you don't get meal breaks, you don't get rest breaks. You can work them straight through whatever time they're actually allowed to work. But once they hit those maximum hours or those deadlines for the day, they need to be done working.
And for 14 to 18 or 17-year-old,
Okay, so yeah, so the hours of work only apply to 14 and 15-year-olds at both the state and federal level.
okay.
Once a child turns 16 years old, the employer is free to work them as an adult 24/7, 365.
Okay. Okay. What would be the best place for a 16-year-old to work besides fast food and retail?
That I couldn't say. The folks at the local workforce centers would probably give you better ins than I could as to what would be a good job for them.
Okay, and we can pause right there, and you can find your local workforce center at dws.wyo.gov/WFC. Stands for Workforce Center. Trisha just put that in the chat. That's where you can find your local workforce center and pay them a visit. Next question, can we hire a student learner during summer break if the contract wasn't in effect before school got out?
That I don't know, and you probably want to contact that email for business risk
Okay,
to find out that just what exactly those rules are.
very good. That email was businessrisk@wyo.gov. How long can a 14-year-old work a week or day if they are volunteering?
Okay, if they're truly volunteers and they are not being employees, they can work as much as they want to or as much as the parent will allow. But again, it had to be genuine volunteering.
Okay. Are there differences for tribal businesses for minors employed in the workforce?
Tribal businesses can operate how they want to operate. They are generally exempt from both state and federal law. So if somebody's working for a tribal business, I would not have any jurisdiction over that particular business.
Okay. Would working a bingo game for a fundraiser be allowed for minors?
Yeah.
Would, okay. Can a 16-year-old work at a tire and auto shop, and what duties would he be restricted from?
Okay. Again, they can work there. You probably want to keep them away from any power equipment. You certainly don't want to have them anywhere near any powered hoisting apparatuses. Um, there's some of the power tools I would imagine as well would be forbidden. But again, manual labor, picking up and running tires, um, doing clerk work, checking people out, things like that would be fine.
Okay. If a minor is injured on the job and the employer does not offer workers' comp paperwork, what is the minor's course of action?
They would need to contact Wyoming Workers' Compensation directly and file that claim with the division.
Okay. All right. That you can find the workers' comp division on our website at dws.wyo.gov/WC for workers' compensation. We have hazardous occupations. Is there any rule about hazardous environments, and what would that be?
See, it depends on what the kid is doing and what they're exposed to. If they're in a position where they would be exposed to dangerous chemicals, um, like they might be aerosoled in the air for some reason, you would definitely want to keep those kids out of that area, or let's not have them there at all. They can, like I say, they can work on construction projects. They just can't be doing the hazardous occupations of using the power tools or the equipment, but they can be doing manual labor in those areas. Um, it really just kind of depends on what it is you're having them do and how close they end up having to be to some of these hazardous things.
Okay. Are there rules around janitorial work for a 16-year-old?
In general, no. Yeah, as far as the state's concerned, they could use the chemicals used for janitors because, again, state protections come off at 16. You might check with the feds to see if they have any particular issue with it, particularly using like a floor buffer or some of those machines. They would have issues there. But that would be where you want to check is with the USDOL.
Okay. Are there time limits? Are there limits on time allowed to work if the minor who is 17 is working a work experience through WIOA?
I am not aware of any restrictions. Again, once they become 16, they can pretty much work as much as the employer wants them to. But
Okay.
you might want to get a hold of your WIOA rep if they might have a specific limitation there that I'm not aware of.
Okay. Can a 17-year-old run any equipment?
Not much, no. Again, if you have specific equipment in mind, you definitely want to get a hold of the USDOL and run it by them. But most power equipment is kind of off limits for folks under the age of 18.
Okay. Could a 16-year-old drive a company vehicle to a landfill to drop off tires?
No.
I imagine
Mhm.
your insurance company would probably say absolutely not to that.
Yeah.
Um,
And
okay, and we already answered the one about the dishwasher, and the volunteering.
if I could give an example about driving for minors. We had a business not terribly long ago um, allowing 16, 17-year-olds to drive gators, those little UTVs or ATVs for work. And they were doing it largely on off of public roads. One day, one of their 17-year-olds decided it would be faster if they transited on a public road. And in the process of doing that, they ran into the back of a truck. The kid was hurt pretty bad. And when we heard about it, we have a memorandum of understanding with the USDOL. So we reported it to the USDOL. They became involved, and that employer was hit with a pretty hefty fine for that. So I really caution folks about having minors drive anything, because while they may be able to do it on private property, kind of where you're off the road. If they ever get on the road, you could be in serious trouble.
Okay. Could an individual, let's see, where did that go? Can an individual younger than 18 operate an enclosed cab lawn tractor for mowing? So that would be like for large landscape areas for a business, think similar to parks.
Okay. Yeah, if they're 16 and over, they can use those riding lawnmowers. Again, as long as they're on the lawn, not on public thoroughfares.
Okay. Manual slicers such as veggie slicers at a deli, are minors good to operate? They're no power equipment, all manual.
If they're all manual, they are fine to use those.
Okay. All right. Let's see. Can a minor be recorded on security cameras while working, and are there special consent requirements?
No, I mean, they can be recorded just like any other employee.
Okay. Could minors be participate in unpaid trial shifts before being hired?
No. That's what that learner wage is for. If you want to try them out, see if they're going to do it, but you don't want to pay them the full amount. If you can get them to work for $4.25 an hour, you can do that.
And good luck getting them to work for $4.25. Okay. Can a minor work across state lines remotely if the employer is located elsewhere?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Could a 16-year-old work around semi-trucks, not driving, but work around them?
Again, you can work around them as long as they're not getting involved in any actually operating the equipment, using the power tools on them, or there's any kind of dangerous chemicals involved in working on them. They would be fine to be working around them.
Okay, and what are the exemptions if the teenage workers are family?
Okay, so if the teenager is working for their grandparents, their parents, or their guardian, they can do those jobs. They don't have to be 14. They can be under 14 years old to do that. They still have the requirements of they can't do any hazardous occupations while they're working for their parents, and they can't work during the school hours while working for their parents. The really only exemption is they don't have to be 14. You can get your 8-year-old to help you out at the shop if you need to.
Okay. Which law applies when federal child labor rules and state rules conflict?
Always go with the law that provides the greatest protection or the greatest benefit to the employee. And in most cases, that's going to be the federal law.
Okay. I think we covered this one. Can a 16-year-old work on a road construction crew?
Again, as long as they're not doing any kind of working on the heavy construction equipment or using the power tools, they're doing just manual labor, picking things up, running a shovel. You wouldn't want them doing anything involved in excavation or trenching operations, but they can work on those sites.
Okay. And are there exemptions for minors working for parents in agriculture, specifically for running equipment?
There are. Generally, again, kids working on agriculture projects are exempt. If you're working on a specific piece of equipment, I would again contact the USDOL to see if they would have an issue with it. Because they may have some things that I am not aware of that they would not want children operating.
Okay. Can a minor be required to carry cash deposits to a bank?
Yes.
Okay.
There's still a lot of work to prevent that. I don't know that you want to give them a bunch of money to a little kid.
And could a minor work alone during opening or closing shifts?
There is no exemption to that. They could,
Okay.
again, provided those open and closing shifts are within the rules allowed if they're 14 and 15 between the actual hours they're
Right.
allowed to work.
I think, unless we've got any last minute questions, I think that about does it for our questions. Um, I want to say thank you, Jason, very much. We really appreciate you taking the time to be here. This, you answered a lot of questions, I think, for everybody. So thank you for sharing your knowledge and providing us some real clear and practical guidance. This presentation is especially relevant because understanding youth employment is not just about compliance. Um, it's about creating safe and lawful, meaningful opportunities for young people while protecting them and your own organization. Looks like I have a hand raised. Kristen Camp, did you have a question? If you do, you could type it in the chat. Okay, no problem, Kristen. Katie Mullen says, I would love to see workforce centers put their heads together and give examples of what kind of jobs have been good for youth. We get questions like that a lot here in Rock Springs. This was extremely helpful though. So maybe we can have the workforce centers put their heads together, just like Katie says. Um, Thank you again, everyone, for being here today. We hope you do walk away feeling more confident and prepared to hire that young person. Before we move on, though, I'd like to ask you to take a survey on today's presentation. Trisha just dropped that link in the chat. In the next few days, we will also email you the recording and the slides. Jason, if you could send me a PDF of your slides, that would be awesome. And while you are completing the survey, we are going to be posting another link, which will let you register for our next presentation, Wyoming 211, Connecting People, Services, and Support in Wyoming. So join us on July 14th to learn how Wyoming 211 connects people across the state with services, support, and community resources. This session will provide an overview of Wyoming 211's role in strengthening communities and highlight key case management programs, including Kinship Connections, the Aging and Disability Resource Center, and Communicare. Attendees will gain a better understanding of the programs, who they serve, and the support available to Wyoming individuals and families. Thank you all so very much for joining us today, and we will see you in July.